we're going to move into the panel discussion, and I hope we will have Daniela will be with us in the panel section, but we will also have 3 other people coming from various places around the earth, so Paraguay, Ecuador. So I would like to have the 4 panel members on the screen, if that's possible. If they are there, there we have them. We have Daniela Tilbury, we have Raquel Frata, who's leader of initiatives for the new economy. There we all have you. I was just kind of trying to present all of you, but the 4 of you are there. Daniela Tilbury, we already know you. Kind of a couple of thought-provoking things for me very much about, okay, but is education currently as we do it, is that greenwashing what we're doing, or should we do it in a different way? What is the role of the educators then still? How do we change that when we don't know where we're changing towards to? A couple of those things that we will touch upon. So they're kind of, for me, very, very interesting. And also maybe just like, do we still need a classroom anyways? Or is that maybe too much the old-fashioned way that will not solve the problems? You know, those kind of things. But first, so I'll let people already think a bit about those things. First, I would like to move to Raquel Frata, who is from the Foundation Moises Bertoni in Paraguay, and who has set up, well, maybe one of those schools where you think this might be the type of future that we're looking for when we're moving forward. So Raquel, may I invite you to kind of just explain briefly who you are and what your project is about.
Okay, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. It is a great honor to be with you at this conference, virtually all the way from Paraguay. It is 9:14 here in the morning. I know that it's your afternoon, so thank you very much to Educate Belgium for the invitation, and everyone also joining us from the distance and in Brussels. I'm very excited to share with you the work that we do at the Moises Bertoni Foundation in terms of education and climate change. My name is Raquel Frata. I'm from this wonderful country right in the middle of South America, Paraguay. I work as the leader of Initiative for the New Economy at the foundation, which Moises Bertoni is a nonprofit organization with 30 years of experience focusing on nature conservation, education, and sustainable development. I designed and I implement projects focusing on sustainability, education, and projects adding economic, social, and environmental value at this wonderful place, which is the UNESCO Maracaibo Biosphere Reserve and other natural protected areas where we work in Paraguay. So just before I joined the Moises Bertoni Foundation 10 years ago, I live and study in the United States, where I graduated with a Master in Public Administration. But what I'm very proud to say that I work with vulnerable populations in the United States, including the migrant workers, the homeless, and the single mothers, who have taught me a great deal about what does it mean to be vulnerable, what does it mean to be a migrant worker, and what does it mean to be a single mom as well. So with that background, I'm very excited to share with you all the work and the good practices that we do here at the Moises Bertoni Foundation, and what are our challenges in the area of education, focusing on sustainable development and protecting.
Yes. Now, Raquel, we have a couple of pictures that are, at least on the Mentimeter screen, you can see a couple of them. So if you kind of, I think it's one of the projects, it's kind of the project that you set up. Can you please, there are 3 pictures. Yes, now you see them too, normally on your screen. So what do we see here?
Well, this is the Maracaibo Nature Forest Reserve. It's one of the last standing forests in Paraguay in the eastern region. It's a private reserve, and it's 6 times the size of the capital Asunción. Is one of the places with the greatest biodiversity in the country. And in this forest, in this reserve, we have a boarding school for young girls, for young rural and indigenous girls who attend school the last 3 years. So they are between the ages of 15 and 18 years old.
Okay, I think I have, yes. So this is the boarding school, I imagine.
Yes, this is the boarding school. This is the Centro Educativo en Baracayú. It was established 10 years ago as a conservation strategy. Why? Baracayú Forest is one of the last standing forests in the eastern region. So the question was, how are we going to protect the forest in the long run? 64,000 hectares of native primary forest. How are we going to protect when we know that conservation can no longer be taken as a side project away from the community? So the school was established with the mission and with the vision to integrate the community into their conservation quest. And also yes.
So moving a bit, some taking it from what Daniela said just before, very much about, well, we have to be future oriented in one way or another to kind of go to the future and then bring it back. I see here kind of a future vision that somehow indigenous people and girls should kind of have a role in that future. Is that how that originated for you?
Yes, I mean, and I want to quote again Daniela when she said, we need to help to create alternatives for the future. And this is exactly what we do. Let's play this into context. The forest is located in a region where there is a high level of teen pregnancy, where rural women don't have the opportunity to study, their limitations are very high. So how we can change that future, how we can change the future of these girls who without access to quality education wouldn't be able to have a future. So the school was established with the mission to empower young girls, rural girls and indigenous girls to become agents of change and forest protector and agent of sustainable development, who they can change their future and change their communities.
Yeah. Okay. Very nice. Then, just looking at Daniela. Daniela, do you know of this initiative of Raquel?
Yes. I've met Raquel in various congresses actually, and aware.
And so is this the approach that you say, or this is going towards that approach, or maybe this is the approach already, like the whole school, the futures oriented, hands-on experiences, shifting assumptions. You know, the list
I don't know. I don't know what they do. I know what the goal is. So I can't actually comment on that because I don't know if the students are actually taught futures thinking as part of this. I know that the aspiration is very future oriented, but in terms of the teaching and learning of every day and how their experience of learning might be different or not, that's where the important aspect is, and I haven't heard of that yet.
Okay, so that will be interesting to delve into that during the topics that we will discuss within the panel session. Thank you very much, Raquel. Thank you very much for this introduction. And there, I know there's much more to say about it, but we also have two other panelists, and I'm first going to Cecilia Faca-Jones, who is advisory board member of Education Heroes. Cecilia.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Cecilia. It's a great pleasure to be here. And thank you for the invitation just to share a little bit of my knowledge and experience on the field of early childhood development. So whenever we talk about education, we tend to forget that this education process needs to start very early in life if we really want to have the impact that I completely agree with many of the things that Daniela shared with us. And I truly think that if we can start early in life, we can probably just make like a huge impact. And just a little bit of my background, because I know this part of the panel is to just share with everybody a little bit of our background. So I have been working for the Bernard Valier Foundation for 6 years. I recently resigned because I decided to go back to my home country, which is Ecuador. So if you look at my LinkedIn profile, I am currently a bikepacker and public life explorer, because this is my favorite way of learning, which is just kind of like acknowledging how important it is to be in touch with your close environment. And before working for the Bernard Valier Foundation, I was a coordinating Ministry of Social Development in Ecuador. And just to share a little bit about this important ministry, I was responsible of coordinating the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Housing, the Ministry of Welfare, the Ministry of Sports, and the Ministry of Health. With this idea of really trying to make sure that you could promote a system, kind of like a system towards responding to social policy. So I hope in this panel I can share a little bit of my experience of what running like public policy around education has been like, together with really emphasizing what the early years can bring into the different experiences of dealing with climate change and how this needs to be conceived in a cross-cutting way that touches all the different sectors.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much, Cecilia. I also have a couple of pictures that you sent us. Not all of them. I know there are kind of 7 or 9 that I don't remember exactly the amount, but this is the first one. Nature leads the way. Very young people, kind of engaging them already. Could you explain why you put this one?
Well, one of the big learnings on this last years, and especially during the pandemic years, is how much children need to be in touch with nature, and how important it is that part of the learning of preserving nature and just enjoying being around green and blue infrastructure. This has to be in a natural way, which means that children need to be in direct touch with nature, and yeah, there are lots of experiences. We recently, in the Bernard Valier Foundation, we launched a whole book trying to relate the effects of climate change with early childhood development. And there's some great evidence on how good it is for the physical and mental development of children to be in touch with nature.
Yeah, so basically it's a bit the card box that Daniela showed in her presentation. What about this one, Design for People?
So some of the work that we were doing is trying to understand if we could think a city from 95 centimeters, which is the height of a healthy 3-year-old child. What would change in the cities in order to make cities like a better place for children to learn and explore and be more creative? And I think for me, the best solution, and here I'm talking from a practical way, is to really try to prioritize people's spaces rather than what happens in most cities around the world, which is like having a lot of public space for cars rather than having public space for people. So in this picture, I was trying to share with everybody, if we can really create these spaces where people can meet, where we can bring back green and blue infrastructure, we are also supporting to basically diminish or at least try to cope with some practical solutions to what the effects of climate change can bring.
Yeah, very. And then taking the 95 centimeter maybe as a guiding principle is one of those transformative way of doing that. I have thank you very much, Cecilia, for your introduction. Then we have the last but not the least, Cécile Martin-Phipps, directeur de l'Institut de la francophonie pour le développement durable. Je vous laisse la parole pour vous introduire.
Merci beaucoup, c'est vraiment très apprécié, Ruben. Merci aussi aux organisateurs de nous avoir invités. Donc, je suis Cécile Martin-Phipps.
Well, thank you very much for your invitation. I'm Cécile Martin-Phipps. I do represent the Institut de la Francophonie for Sustainable Development. So we are part of the French-speaking family. And within that organization, we have a department devoted to education and training based in Dakar. So we have 88 member states and governments which are part of the French-speaking area. They are scattered around the fifth continent in the northern, western, eastern, and southern part. And altogether, we work with a view to enhance those challenges. We try to focus mainly on environmental education. And both institutes, the one based in Dakar and our institute based in Quebec, we both work together, of course, because we try to think and determine how we could possibly strengthen the different tools, how we can support teachers with a view to focus on climate change education, how to get rid of waste, what about circular economy and things of the kind. But we also try to meet the challenges mentioned by Rachel and Daniela, i.e. those children who have to experience climate change and who do suffer the direct consequences of all that, and mainly those children who cannot go to school anymore. So we don't have all the solutions, but anyway, in the French-speaking part, in the French-speaking countries, we have plenty of examples, by the way. And I would like to give the example of Andorra. It is a very small country. Usually people don't know where the country is located. It is in between France and Spain, by the way. And this very tiny country is quite innovative indeed, because when they are busy right now drafting some legal text about environmental issues, or when to have something to prepare regarding waste and so on and so forth. They always discuss the drafting of the bill with the Ministry of Education, and they try to see how to educate children about this type of legal text and so on and so forth. Maybe some people might call this greenwashing, but I don't believe it is the case. It is a way to give tools and to equip children with tools so that they can understand what it is, because we have a linear world indeed. And usually we tap into resources, and at the end of the day, 90% of all that turns into waste. And what we would like to get finally is a change, and we would like to have a much more sustainable approach, and that's what we need to teach from the earliest age. And within our institute, our environmental institute in favor of sustainable development, we try to inform decision makers. We try to involve those decision makers as well as public and private stakeholders. So altogether, they did realize that the French-speaking countries are made up of 70% of young people. We have 70% of young people who are under the age of 35 years old. And if we don't do anything in the field of youth education and environmental education, it means that we will miss the objective. We will miss the target. There will be no change. You know, the kind of change we are calling for will probably not emerge. Yes, thank you. And how do you believe what Daniel Tilbury said? How is it that maybe you might question a few principles you focus on? Did you decide finally to challenge some elements? No, we did not challenge or question those elements indeed, but we decided to make the most of it and to make a kind of inventory of all existing good practices in our respective countries. We are not aware of all of them, and that's maybe a call I could possibly make today. Please send us any example of good practice you might have, educational material, educational kits, or anything you might have, comics, cartoons, videos, TikTok videos, anything. We're interested in all that because we are looking for this type of experience. And our program, which is called ELAN, meaning moving forward, is an educational program meant for children and for the children in the Indian Ocean countries or in sub-Saharan Africa. We would like to include this environmental dimension into our programs. And ELAN is very interesting in terms of program. What we are trying to promote here is to get the tools so that children will get a better literacy, if I may say so, regarding environmental issues. And we do believe that we need to educate our children in French, you know, or in their mother tongue. So that's what we need to do. But of course, it does depend on the type of material you might use, of course. Typically here in Canada, there is a kind of joke, you know, because usually in kindergarten, children get a book entitled "The Chicken is Crossing the Road." You might believe it's not really useful, but maybe you could get the same type of book and you might have to learn how to switch off a light when you get out of a room or things like that. It would be much more useful to learn to read with such a book. Yes, and it does give some food for thought regarding what Daniela told us, why or how the chicken is crossing the road is not really focused on the future, and we might indeed have something which would be a bit more relevant. So we have covered some issues, but we would like to cover 3 issues in particular during the panel. The first panel is indeed the changing position of education in a changing world, and I do believe that Daniela did focus at length on that particular point. And I have a first question for you. If we need to change the position of education in this changing world, then we need, and what do we need? A stronger focus on the basics. And I think that Mona, if I remember well, did insist upon the urgency of all that, because we need to bear in mind the fact that sometimes children have no access at all to education or do not get any education, or the way to engage the community, because it's really critical to engage the community on top of the pupils, not only the pupils, but also the community. And we need to have maybe a much more, to experiment much more radically or with new forms of teaching, which might be a bit more radical in terms of approach. So what do you think? What should we do in that particular case? A stronger focus on the basics to involve the community as much as the pupil, to experiment much more with radically new forms.
And I'm switching into English again, but that's also because I'm going to ask Daniela the first question about this. If we need to change the position of education, then there are a couple of things here that we have here. Can I still have the Mentimeter, please, before we move, because then we can see the results. And that Daniela can see the results.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Stefan, because I don't know why they have to be in competition. Why can't we teach the basics through involving the community and the pupils at the same time? Why can't we do that? And I found the question a bit odd, because, you know, if we are going to deal with change and if we're going to have this more newer forms, our young people and our adults still need to understand the basics too. I think that's really important. You know, you do need to have those foundation tools as part of being able to take things forward. They're really, really important. The issue is not to do one at the exclusion of the other one.
Yes. So do you think that with how we invest within education at the moment, sometimes you feel that things are being put into juxtaposition from one another, that you say, oh, we need to make a choice, but is that a false choice that we are facing with those kind of things, that what you say, no, but we can do those things at the same time? Is that because we are not thinking well? Is that because we're kind of not doing it well? What do you think are the reasons that we're not seeing that we can do it together?
Yeah, we're not disconnecting. I think that, you know, we have a scenario where we have things happening in separate baskets, in separate parts of our brain, when in fact these are all connected. So I think this is part of the problem. The existing school system, the existing way of working has helped us put things in boxes. And we need to stop that type of education. We need to have the type of education that helps us see connections.
Yeah,
and that's part of the changes that we need. And I don't think that's that radical, because in real life, when you don't go in school, you know, things are connected. The way you live, the way you eat, the way you relate to others, they're all connected. It's only schools and universities that put them into boxes.
Yeah, so we start having to look at how we connect the different things, like maybe what we do, what you say, at least how I understand it, that how we do that, and that we do it in a natural way already. What about Raquel? How are you doing this within your school? How are you connecting those different things together?
Well, I have to follow with what Daniela said. And this is the way of the systemic way of learning. You know, why separating? You know, we at the Maracaibo Educational Center, we have a curriculum based on environmental education with a strong connection with the community. So how we manage the day-to-day days, the students have class during the morning, they rotate their classes in order to do projects, which is a learning-based project that they connect with the community. And so it's a very integral and holistic way of learning from the forest, you know, where the forest becomes the aula, and when the community and the projects that are implemented in the community becomes part of the aula, you know, where they learned not only with books and not only where they learn how to add and how to read.
So on a day-to-day basis, how does that look like?
Well, this is a boarding school. This is a boarding school established within the forest in a rural area where you have 60 or from 30 to 60 students per year, and they divide in two groups, you know, one that is in the aula and the other one that is doing, for example, the gardening, the vegetable gardening, or that is implementing other project in the forest. So they rotate. They have this rotation system where they also integrate STEM education, you know, robotics from the forest to the world. So it's a very holistic way of learning.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Peut-être Cécile.
Cécile, if you don't mind, you did refer to good practices you would like to compile, and how do you think we could possibly reconnect with the way we go through that as a community? Do you have this type of approach as well, or do you promote this type of approach in your curricula? Yes, indeed. Indeed, we try to get rid of this silo approach, you know, or this basket or box approach. And it is true not only for the environment, but also for the education, because we tend to create compartments with, you know, within our world. We have environment, then we have energy, then we have water, then we have farming or agricultural activities. And that's not life. That's not life, of course. And we need to put all that together, because together that's life, and we need to educate our children to move forward in this environment as a whole. And we always focus on the possibility to go back to good practice or good practices which prevailed 100 years ago. In some places, those practices are still in place, but that's what we need to promote indeed. And that's why I decided to make a call to French-speaking countries. We need to share those elements of good practice, because in many countries, we lost sight of all that. We lost sight of this connection with the nature. with Mother Nature, and that the planet is there and has been there for millions of years, and we won't be there forever, as far as I'm concerned, and as far as we are concerned. And that's what we need to do, you know, to raise awareness about that. But do you believe that we as adults are in a position to do that? Do you believe that we have the relevant skills with a view to implement this change? Because we were our education was based on this silo approach, you know, it was quite logical for us. Do you believe we're in a position to do that? Or who might do that? Yes, that's true that we have this compartmentalized approach, but basically human beings do not operate like that, you know. They are made up of exchanges and connections, and it's up to us to tap into that, you know, to go back to that. It's, of course, quite easy to be an expert in a given field of activity, but we are human beings and we are meant to exchange, and that's what we need to promote. And we need to be vigilant regarding education as a whole. Why? Well, because the impact of the digital is positive, but also negative. Because of algorithms, we are invited to create more boxes and more silos, and that's probably the drawback.
How do you view that? You kind of said, okay, but I'm doing all kinds of things. Maybe I'm a kind of different well, I don't know if you look at educating in a different way. How are you looking at this, kind of making that connection, interconnecting different things?
Well, for me, I think the most important thing, and probably my colleagues have said that, but I think thinking from an environmental perspective, I do think it's important to create like an educational system, a more holistic way of educating children. And again, if we see it from the early years, so if we start talking about babies and toddlers, the youngest population in the world, and some of the important learnings, for example, of the work I have done in cities, is if you're able to enable a city that promotes healthy connections, then a children is constantly exploring and constantly learning. And I also think this is also preparing a child to make its own conclusions, to kind of like cope with some of the climate changes, challenges that they will be facing, because I do want to say that a baby that is born today is going to have to face a lot of environmental issues. So if you can start really early in life, kind of like really allowing or enabling their immediate environment to become this environment where they feel part of, where they're responsible of kind of like exploring, creating, and learning. I think probably when they become adults, their response to the collective environment is also going to be different. And maybe just to give you a couple of practical examples, I've seen how, for example, many people and many people supporting climate change are great supporters of active mobility, which means that people stop using cars or motorized ways of moving around a city, for example, and start walking or biking more. And this, of course, is a challenge in many parts of the world. But what I do think that if a baby or a toddler starts experiencing to walk very early in life or to bike very early in life, and they enjoy doing that, then this becomes a habit. And if it becomes a habit, it's also easier to keep doing it through their daily life in the future. So I'm a big supporter of how you can really kind of like impact the life of young children in order to really make them part of the solution rather than imposing any specific learning.
And what should we then as educators unlearn in order to be able to do that?
Unlearn. I think for me, just being more open to be more innovative, to be more creative, to probably kind of leave the classroom to learn more from outside. And I know that Raquel, for example, was mentioning the work with indigenous populations. And of course, coming from a country like Ecuador, where there's a lot of indigenous wisdom. So for me, it's sometimes my own experience of working with indigenous population is that there's so much we have to learn from this wisdom that we have from vernacular populations, that maybe we really need to start listening more to different ways of seeing the world and different ways of learning. And
getting out of the classroom, basically.
Be more open.
That's what you're saying. Getting out of the classroom. I'm just looking at the audience here. There will be, for the people online, there will be a question, an open question will be coming for topic 2. But just at the audience here, is there a question that you would like to ask one of the ladies that we have in the panel here at this stage? Because we have this opportunity for the people that are physically here to kind of, if there is a question. Yes.
Je peux parler en français ou en anglais?
Bien sûr. Faut juste laisser le temps aux personnes.
If I can speak English, yes, of course, please do. Just give the time people to take the headset. Well, I was very interested by Daniela's presentation. I would like to ask her how climate justice can be integrated into all this, because it's very interesting to learn that EPFI has environmental education aspects with the Great Green Wall, but if it's just learn about waste management, waste sorting out, I think it is not enough. We need to call upon climate justice. Why are we in this position? What's the responsibility of countries of the North or the South? What's the impact on other living beings other than human? And what is our responsibility to them?
Were you able to follow this question? What is the importance of climate justice in that system? And is it possible to integrate that within this transformational way that you kind of said, it's that you explained us? How do you include climate justice in there? Because there is definitely something important there in terms of.
Thank you for translating the question, because I'm afraid my French is not up to scratch. For me, when I talk about climate education, I am talking about climate justice. For me, it's not about going out and planting more trees. It's about addressing the inequalities in our system. It's about making sure that they are, enhancing opportunities for people and breaking down practices that exploit people and planet. So for me, everything I said is climate justice, and maybe I should have spelled that out at the beginning, because at the moment our education systems are not just. They are reproducing those bad relationships that are in our society. And so this is why I think through the type of education that questions quite deeply, the kind of education that does not reproduce what's already happening, but actually starts to change the nature of our relationship with other people and with the planet, we start to address issues of climate justice. To me, they're really, really important. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think it does, and it relates to me. It resonates with me with the term decolonization that you were using.
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely right.
And then coming back to that question that I asked then earlier, what should we unlearn? Because I have the impression that we might get a bit stuck into the fact, oh yeah, we have to do it in a different way. It has to be kind of completely differently, this kind of different approach. But are we able to do that? What do we need to unlearn?
Unlearn schools as we are, schooling as we have it at the moment. Stop putting all those desks facing the front. Stop assuming that the teacher is the one who has to impart the knowledge. It is the community. It is the local supermarkets and stores. It's just as important to expose our young children, our adults, our learners to the natural environment, like the experiences that are being shared, as it is to take them to the local store to see how their spending actually has an impact back on them and their choices of what they buy in their local store, with their little money that they may have, the power of the purse and how it might ripple back into the community, or whether they are, using the very little money they have to buy designer brands. And I know this for a fact, because last year I went to the outer national parks in Tanzania, which took me 9 hours to get there from the capital because they were so difficult to get to. And the last thing I expected to see was a chief with a Nike hat on, as a symbol or a symbolism of the power in the community. And I'm looking at development, I'm looking at nature protection, and I'm thinking consumer goods, consumerism, what they buy in the local store, their trading, what they value. All this is connected to education and learning. All this is connected to relationships, where they be global relationships and branding, or relationships which feed back into the local community and reinforce the value of what happens in those communities.
Yeah, thank you very much. This brings us also a bit to the second topic, which is about the changing position of the pupil student, kind of that critical thinking as a guiding principle, where I also have a question, like how should we, teachers, schools, and system around approach pupils and students so that they are prepared for a changing world? So again, if you're not online, menti.com, code 52270089. So I'm very curious to know about the audience here in Brussels, but also the audience around the world. How should we then approach pupils, students, so that they're prepared for a changing world? We already said a few things about that, but I'm curious to see also what people think about that. And if you have a question, you can put that also in there if you want to. Obviously, we should. You might have an idea, which is great. But if you're not sure, but you still have questions, then you could put them there too. Challenge them by experience, debate, philosophy. Invest in digitalization and promote critical thinking, making them appreciate nature. Intégrer dans le programme d'enseignement. To this end, we also need to know alternative government structures that we can educate students about. Ask the pupils and students themselves. Yes. En partant de leur sensibilité de la dimension subjective. Ellen, can you go a bit up? Yes. Qu'ils ont déjà des défis environnementaux et sociaux. Connecting again with nature in an authentic way. Just wondering what an authentic way would mean then. Learning through play, make everybody accountable for small actions of their lives. Okay, let them use their creativity to become change actors. Provide basic skills and let them experience with these skills. Accompagner la formation des enseignants, leur donner des outils.
Support teachers training, give them a toolbox, enabling children to practice, to touch, not to just have classroom session, understand the challenges around you.
If you're looking at those answers, what you have been able to read them a bit, I hope. What answers do you see here? Are these the answers that we're looking for?
I mean,
in order
again,
to kind of approach our students?
Yes, I think we should be able to do them all. Like, I don't think there's one answer to that question. But of course, from my perspective, from what I've seen is working well, it's being able to create this healthy connections that we were talking before, right? And again, talking from the early years perspective, when we think that a baby is making up to 1 million connections every second, and the very first years of life, we are like really kind of like ensuring if this baby or human being is going to be able to develop all this healthy connections in he or her brain, then I'm thinking, okay, which is the best way that we can enable the environment to do that? And for me, my answer would be is just like ensuring that you're creating opportunities to observe, to listen to new things, to create and co-design things together, to be able to almost like kind of like really try to use as many senses as possible in order to really be part of that process. So just really trying to understand that for me, some of this like really impactful learning processes need to happen in a way that people will remember. And as Daniela was saying, we've seen that, for example, children that are able to have more contact with the local communities, when you have a child be able to meet his neighbors or go to the shops and talk to the people there, run their own surveys, understand the natural environment that surrounds them, experiment with the natural elements around them, play with water, play with natural elements. That's what makes them aware of many of the things that have to do with some of the environmental challenges that we have. Breathe, for example, one of the interesting experiments that we did, just an example with air, was around like what do children think about air pollution, for example, which is such a big topic on environmental change. And it's interesting to see how very young children can be very aware of how harmful air can be if they really understand how is this impacting their health and life.
Yeah. Okay, so kind of let them experience kind of the a new way of doing. Raquel, how are you doing this? Within the nature reserve, within the boarding school, many of those answers, are you implementing them all too?
Well, the idea is place the student at the center of the action, and what it means is learning by doing, and as mentioned before, also let them create, build, and also using social art as a tool for behavior change. Art is a very powerful tool to connect with other people, because through art we can connect our heart and our mind and our hands, as Daniela was mentioning earlier in her presentation. And I think that is very powerful as a tool for education.
And so putting the students central to basically building the curriculum, to building kind of the whole learning approach. What is for you the most surprising that you learned doing that?
Is how creative the students can be when you give them the opportunity to have their own voice and to use their own voice to solve a problem or to give you a solution. You will be very surprised how they can explore a solution from their point of view.
Okay, and so kind of basically asking the students means that you get surprised by their point of view and how you can do it, and how. Okay, so basically, as an educator, it's kind of asking those questions to the students, to the pupils, being one of the main things that you should be doing. Great, yeah. Daniela, do you have any things to kind of add on this?
Yeah, I just go back to what I was trying to argue, which is that we have institutionalized learning, right? We're putting learning into the schools, and we are more concerned with building buildings in places that require basic learning sometimes, and tying that basic learning to things that have already been taught for centuries in their community, which is valued and useful to their communities. But we've institutionalized learning. We focus our efforts on building schools as physical structures, on having equipment that faces the front. And I think it's about time that we questioned that type of learning, not just have it in the forest, which is great, but have it in the community as it has always been, and formalize that learning and what is valued and what can be learned.
Okay,
so
should we then get rid of diplomas, for example, in schools, like you said? Okay, no. Okay,
but the buildings, why are we only considering learning to be what is understood when you sit down on a desk, on a chair, looking to the front?
Yeah, Raquel, Raquel, do you still have like school classrooms where you have like the blackboard and then you have like the desks and facing the blackboard? Do you still have that?
Yeah, I mean, we do have that as well, because sometimes we have presentations, but it's the way of learning. Currently, for example, we have a project called Voices of Maracaju, which is a podcasting project where the students learn the skills to enhance their own voices and to talk about sustainable tourism, climate change, and sustainable development. And the classroom, of course, just become a space where they can use also technology, digital technology to implement this podcasting project. So we do use both, you know, the old fashion of, you know, someone presenting something, but at the same time strongly focusing on learning by doing, which is not necessarily by sitting and just listening.
Yeah. So, okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Is there a question from the audience again here, from the audience here in Brussels? If you have, then just raise your hand. Then I will give you also the floor to ask one of those panel members to ask him a question. Cécile, est-ce que vous en êtes déjà au point où vous envisagez?
Cécile, are we at the point that you envisage not to build schools? Maybe you don't build school yourself, but is it a possibility to have another approach than the blackboard and the desk? Yes, especially when it comes to education to the environment. You are right
about that. Dans ce que nous voyons, en fait, des bonnes pratiques.
In what we can see in the good practices in French-speaking countries, most messages are learning by doing, be it young people, being people at university. You have different educational material that can be used. The first one being put them on the field and have them experimenting different approaches. You can also give them the responsibility to become a eco-delegate or eco-representative, well, to try and transform the school. It can also mean work for measuring the ecological footprint of your school. You can work at the school restaurant to make sure that we eat more local products. It's also in speaking and in concrete life, be it in the forest or in urban, rural environment. There are many good practices that deserve being spreaded more widely.
Can you put the results again? Because what I would just wondering, the panel members, thank you, Cécile, because the question that you kind of put in front of my mind when you said that is, what would a student, or what would students have said when we would have asked this question? Like, how should we teach a school, or how should teach a school system around approach me so that they're prepared for, so that I'm prepared for a changing world? What do you think they would have put in there? Would that be any different? What kind of things would you have seen there? Who would like to take the floor there? Cecilia, what do you think they would have asked?
I think probably many children nowadays, and again, it depends if it's the rural context or the urban context, and maybe just because I've been working a lot on the urban context, and also because a lot of children do live in the urban context. I do think a lot of children enjoy learning through technologies, and we also think we saw it during the pandemic on how I think the educational system had never adapted so fast to change. We can question if that change was good or bad, and also the technological gap that we had in many different countries, and how difficult it is to overcome that. But
at least we can change. At least we know now that we can change as education.
Exactly, and we can transform ourselves quite fast, which is what I think the educational sector is quite close many times to say, oh, we cannot change that, because then there isn't like that adaptability, and the pandemic did show us that we can change fast. But I do think a lot of people enjoy using technological networks. I just think we also need to be careful to balance how to use that.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Daniela, what do you think a student or students would have answered to this question that we asked? What do you think they would have answered?
Opportunities to influence. And this is
opportunities to influence.
Yeah, I think the situation is they don't want to know more. I think they have the tools themselves to find out what they need to know. You know, and the schools focus so much on that. And I think the other side of that coin is help them to understand how to influence in their community, in their governments, in their social aspects, in their work. You know, even when they go and take up employment, how can they start to influence, to change and shape things for a different future? Because all they know is how to go on the streets and protest. They think that that's change, and it's not. It's just making their voices visible. It doesn't actually change anything. And because the schools haven't shown them the different ways in which you can influence, what's in your control to influence, and which is the most powerful way you can do it, and what's the most effective way you can do it. And so I was saying, if you give them experiences of real life where they're involved in change in their communities, with their parents, with their volunteer groups, they will become better and better and better at learning to know, but also learning to do change.
Yeah. So asking for influence. We have a question here from the room.
Merci, je vais poser ma question en français.
Allez-y, allez-y.
Yes, I would like to raise my question in English, if you don't mind. Well, what you are saying is really interesting indeed. We have seen different approaches in terms of change in the field of education. And we are tackling environmental issues right now, but we need to bear in mind the fact that we are working at a local level with a view to find and identify global solutions. People say that we need to get children out of school, out of the buildings, with a view to teach them in the nature, you know, to have to learn how to do things in the nature. That's for those who are already part of the system, you know, it is applicable to those who are in the system. And we will, of course, have an opportunity to do that for those who are in the system. But what about those who have never had the opportunity to go to school, you know, to a building? Because sometimes in Africa, you have to go to school and you sit under a tree. There is no blackboard. There is nothing of the kind. And do you think that it would be possible to do that? Because to study, to draw the lessons of all that is important for those who have a computer, those who don't have a clue about digitalization, those who don't have a blackboard and things like that. In Africa, you know, we have students who have never seen a computer. I'm not talking about touching or using a computer, but about seeing a computer. And we need to know how to target, if I may say so, this type of public, and what can we learn from these schools? Is that right? I'm sorry, but the moderator is reformulating the question. How to rebuild education, bearing in mind those students or children who have never seen a computer or who have never been in a classroom, except maybe in the nature under a tree. Cécile, if you don't mind, I think it might be good for you to tackle that particular question. Thank you so much indeed. What can we do with a view to rebuild education or to reshape education, and bear in mind the fact that some children have never been to a classroom as such? Even in the Sahel region, you have to know that we have schools with walls and roof. Even if you don't stay for too long over there, we have in a way some buildings where children can go to school. But of course, the situation which was detailed by this lady is of importance, and we need to meet the needs of those children. We need to see to it that those children have access to the digital tools. That's what we do through CLAC, as we call them. These are learning centers and cultural centers. We have 350 of them. Cécile, sorry to interrupt you, but those sites do operate with digital tools, but anyway, we can also promote education through cell phones or mobile phones. Well, if you have a 2G connection or 3G connection, you can already have access to some information. Cecile, sorry to interrupt you. I'm really sorry, but how would you include all that? What about inclusion of knowledge? Because, you know, if you have a course under a baobab tree or something, the kind, how could you possibly redefine education? Is it something you take on board? Yes, even if you, I've never seen that, but those young people who have a classroom made of a few walls and a roof, you know, which is quite approximate. It is true that those children have to be better connected to their reality. They need to be given tools. They need to have an opportunity to react to those climate changes they do experience on a daily basis, because they've seen that. It's good to know how to read and write is quite good, but it's better to do it while adjusting to the environment, I assume. Thank you very much. We're going to proceed with the third item or third topic. You do realize that a lot of children and young people do not receive a proper basic education. What place what can we do about that? And the first question is, how many children and young persons do not receive a proper basic education according to UNESCO? So do you believe 144 million, 244, 344, 444? What is your opinion about that? Which figure would you select? And we're going to wait for a while and see the final result. And we can see that many people do believe we have 344 million children who do not receive a proper basic education. So 6 do believe it is 444, and 4 do believe it is 244. It is 244, by the way, which is quite huge indeed. It means that we are faced with a situation of urgency, of course. And we need to tackle that urgent situation, how to prepare those children for the changing world. And I do believe it is fully related to the question raised by the lady in the audience. What education do they need? So how to prepare those children for the changing world, a world where the climate change is prevailing. Or, yes, it is already prevailing. And what kind of education do they need? So I think it is fully related to the question raised by the lady in the audience. So what do you think? What is your opinion about that? So I leave you some time to answer the question, giving them the capacities to build innovative solutions.
Give them access to quality basic education. Learn to read and write and critically reflect on knowledge out there. So very much the critical way, revolution, even someone says we need a revolution. Life competences, culturally relevant localized education from the culture of the parents. The parents needs to be made aware. Outdoor education, which is already there. Learn how to claim their rights, integrate parents and communities in awareness raising activities. There's still need for the basics combined with life skills. So there's a combination there that needs to be made. An education that's adapted to their needs. So there's lots of critical thinking, life skills, but also revolution. Daniela, how do you view the matter of revolution? How do you view the matter of the parents in there, the community in there?
Yeah.
Well, maybe just starting with revolution.
I don't think we need a revolution, but we do need transformation. You know, we need to integrate the ways of learning and living that many communities have had for centuries with the way in which we want to advance education. I think we can connect these two. And maybe that's revolutionary in linking things. I don't know. But it's not as if we're coming up with things from scratch. You know, they are there. And what we want to do is to connect their realities with the learning, you know, because the learning that happens in these classrooms is so artificial and so disconnected from their realities that they are two separate things, and they cannot be two separate things. They have to be together if they have any chance at all of surviving climate change and surviving everything else that's hitting us in this 21st century. And I'm not just talking about the particular countries we're concerned with. I'm talking about globally. We have the situation that education is failing us. And so, yes, let's connect what's happening in these classrooms with their everyday lives. Let's connect the head with the hand and the heart. Let's connect the communities with the academic work. I'm not saying we need to get rid of any qualifications or that they shouldn't do schooling in the formal sense. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that they need to be more connected to the realities that face them at this present moment in time.
Now, when you know that we are on the right way, how do you know that? How would you know, as being a an academic person, how would you know that we are on the right way? What would you see then in terms of
I was asking questions about how I was introduced because I didn't hear an introduction about my background. I'm not an academic. So, you know, my experience is very much working with communities and as well as policymakers to address these issues. For us, it's really quite important that we see visible changes, and there has been a lot of very positive changes, you know, particularly in countries in Asia and Africa, but Latin America, you know, when I go to Colombia and I see the work on the ground in terms of connecting their cultural roots to some of the key aspirations they have for the future, which always involves living in harmony with the environment and developing their own skills on the environment so that they can develop economies around them. You know, there are lots of practices out there, and it would take us a whole entire conference of sharing good examples of practice. But because we are so consolidated in our time and we have such little time to talk about it, we have to talk about principles, because we don't have time to share all the wonderful work that's already taking place.
So moving the kind of discussions that we have away from this, maybe the word fossilized is a good way of fossilized way of education, and moving more towards now sharing the good practices, how we connect with the surroundings around us. Raquel, thank you very much, Daniela. Raquel, how do you see the critical thinking in the girls at the girls at the boarding school? How do you see any change? Do you see that they are thinking differently than what you would experience when you're out of that setting?
Yes, well, going back to your question, how do we see that we are in the right track? And I'm very happy to share with you that the students at the Maracayú Educational Center, after they graduate a few years ago, they have established an association called, in Spanish, Brotes of Maracayú, Seeds of Maracayú, which was established by the girls in order to further their actions towards sustainable development and also promoting actions that are important for them. Yesterday, one of our former students was in the Netherlands, as a matter of fact, receiving a prize for a project that she has designed. So we truly see the impact of doing the work that we do with girls in the middle of the forest and raising a new generation of rural girls focusing on becoming agents of change.
So was one of the girls in the Netherlands? Is that what you're saying? Did I understand that well? Yeah. So what was her experience? What did she notice? When she came back? I mean, in terms of critical thinking, what do you think? Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't realize that, or I didn't.
Well, we see a lot of girls accessing scholarships to study abroad. 3 girls have been to Costa Rica, to Earth University. Most of them are also working in enterprise where they promote sustainable tourism. So we see that the education is truly transforming their life because it's pertinent to the realities that we face. And that's something that I really want to focus on. Let's make an education that is pertinent to the realities that we face, and that we give them the skills that are needed for this new century.
Okay, thank you very much, Raquel. I'm moving to Cecilia. Maybe a question that is more kind of, because we're kind of 9 minutes away, 10 minutes away from the end of this session. Like, what are the 2 things, Cecilia, for you that you say, okay, this is the 2 messages that people should kind of retain from the session for you? What do you think they should be?
Thank you. I think lots of things to be said, but if I would have to choose 2 important things, I do think the educational system needs to ensure more healthy connections, as I said before. And when I'm talking about connections, I'm talking about connections with nature, connections among people. And this is not something that just children want, but I think people in general want. We need more spaces that enable these connections. We need more opportunities that promote this kind of exchanges that Raquel was mentioning. So for me, the one important thing is really thinking about the educational system as an opportunity to connect and to connect to what's happening now. And maybe the second thing that I would say is, I do think the educational system needs to focus on enabling children to develop skills that can be helpful to come in a very creative and prepared way to face many of the environmental challenges that they will have in the future. And I think that this is a responsibility of the whole system. And when I'm talking about the system, I'm not talking about the educational system, I'm talking about the social system and the way that we're able to support that creation, or the way that we're able to really kind of promote these new skills that are required. And the skills might be different depending the place in the world that we work in or we live in. But I do think that we need to change the focus from having all this knowledge to developing skills, to learning from the wisdom of many different communities, to learn about what's happening in our own surrounding and context. Yeah. So those were the 2 big messages I would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Cecilia. And then for the people, for the audience, basically, I have put also on the Mentimeter, like, what are for you the principal insights from this session? Cécile, pour vous, quelles sont vos 2 leçons principales, ou en
and
tout cas
what about you, Cécile? What are the 2 takeaway messages we could remember, or we should remember at the end of this session? Well, thank you very much for your question. Well, the cross-cutting approach, this horizontal approach, we need to get rid of this silo-based approach. It is really positive to have a session devoted to environmental education and climate change, because that's the kind of element we do not mention so often. And I'm not going to come back on what Cecilia said. I agree 100% with her. Education is an opportunity for our children to get connected to the real world, and circularity is the second term I would like to mention, because if we want to move towards a more sustainable world, we need to give the relevant tools to our children, wherever they are, whether they are under a tree or whether they're in a building, or a wonderful and modern building at school. It is important to have this circular approach instead of a linear approach.
The 2 messages that people should go away with from this panel session. Raquel, did you hear me?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yeah, okay. That's what I was thinking when I saw you. What are for you the two main messages as takeaways from this panel session, this panel discussion that you had?
Let's make education pertinent to the realities that we face, and let's place the student at the center of the action.
Okay, so education at the center of the action. And the first one, you were so quick.
No, let's play the students at the center of the action.
Place the students at the center of the action. Yes.
And let's make education pertinent to the challenges that we face.
Yes, and let's make education pertinent to the challenges we face. Thank you very much, Raquel. Daniela, what about you? The two main messages.
So I would like to actually reinforce a key message I said earlier, that I think after our discussion, I realized how pertinent it is to this particular community, which is that we need to change our schools from being mirrors to being lighthouses. You know, we really do need to stop to show how things work in our community through our schools or through the learning activity. We need to start to use schools and learning as an opportunity to see what could be rather than what is, you know, to create alternatives to the world we live in at the present time. And that requires developing different skills and different ways of thinking to the ones that are being developed by education and learning at this moment in time. And climate change education holds the key to that transformation from one to the other. So I do hope that more and more learners and educators will take on board the climate education message in its true sense.
Thank you very much, Daniela. So moving towards education as a lighthouse, and maybe can I have the Mentimeter so that we can see what people have, what their main insights were, very much about connection, the interconnection, rethink education, meaningful and authentic. There are kind of lots of those elements that we have discussed today that that came back. I would like to think the four of you, to think Daniela Tilbury, to think, and now I have to look also at there we have, I know the first names, but the surnames kind of got away during this during the whole discussion. So Daniela Tilbury, Raquel Frata, Cecilia Vaca-Jones, and Cécile Martin-Phipps, thank you very much for your input, your conversation, very insightful. And I think, well, with this, we hope that that we will move forward with education as a transformative power. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
And then before we move into the break will be till 4 o'clock, at least Brussels time. So for anyone else around the world, just check when the break will be. And there was one more last question about overall how you would rate this this session, just for us to kind of have an idea how you would rate this session. And then the break till 4 o'clock, and after the break we will continue with, we will follow up with transforming teachers to climate change agents. And I think it's very much in line with what we already discussed up till now. So how do we transform teachers to climate change agents? With a couple of presentations by Education International, and then with projects from the VVOB and from APF. So thank you very much, and see you back at 4.